Greetings from Connellsville, Pennsylvania. I had this very long explanation on why Connellsville is important, but I think you can see why behind me. Connellsville is a major railroad hub, always been for over a century. These were originally tracks of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad and would have gone from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania down to Washington, D.C. This has always been important because the major rail yard behind me is where crews would change off and they would get more locomotives, get more power before they had to go tackle the sand patch grade over the Allegheny Mountains. So many trains, freight and passenger alike, always have stopped here in Connellsville, Pennsylvania. And during the Second World War, as servicemen were being shipped off to war, their trains would stop here. And while they were waiting to move on to their destinations, to service camp, or when they were coming back from war, they would be greeted by the women of Connellsville, Pennsylvania, who would come out and serve them food and light refreshments. This is known as the canteen system. Occurred all across the rail systems across the United States. Now, some places preserve this history, most famously Denison, Ohio. But one location that doesn't get as much credit is Connellsville, Pennsylvania. Fortunately, the people of Connellsville and Fayette County have preserved their part of Second World War and railroad history. Now, as you can see, there's nothing down here except a modern train shelter. The original Baltimore and Ohio Railroad that was the canteen is no longer standing. So we're gonna go a block up street to the Connellsville Canteen Museum and Restaurant. First impressions, there's a lot in here.
There's a lot of stories to read through here. We're going to go for a few, but one to point out is about John J. Patrick. Lived here in Connellsville, was drafted in 1942, actually ended up in the 13th Airborne Division and was on board one of the Flying Coffins, one of the notorious gliders that were used to land in Europe. He ended up surviving the war and later on served in repairing streetcars for the West Penn Rail Company and the nearby car barn. I was a patrolman for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Police Department and ended his careers with Executive Director of the Connellsville Housing Authority.
Frederick Barnhart served in the 110th Infantry 28th Division, aka the Bloody Bucket Division. Went to service February of 1941, so actually he enlisted before Pearl Harbor, ended up serving in Europe, and he actually got captured December 20th, 1944. I presume because it was in Luxembourg at the start of the Battle of the Bulge. And he describes here in this news clipping, during our stay at this camp, the food rations were very scarce. Many of us volunteered for railroad work. For doing so, we would receive more rations. Ultimately, he and a few others were able to escape in April '45 and kind of hid out for a few hours until the 30th Division came rolling in. And what's really cool, they got these Western Union telegrams which were sent to Barnhart's family informing the family that he had been taken prisoner, and then informing them that he had been located and rescued. That is cool.
This is the casket flag for Carl D. McElhenny. Hopefully I am pronouncing that McElhenny. He was the first South Connellsville native to be killed in the Second World War. He was killed in 1944 as part of Operation Shingle, which occurred on the Italian coast. They got a nice little write-up down here about the making of these casket flags. Casualties, the United States government contracted out a small French garment factory to make more of them, and they were told about what was called the Gold Star Mothers, essentially the mothers of the soldiers that were killed, and they would be given gold stars. So they took that to mean that the stars on the flag were meant to be gold, and you can see it has a more yellowish tint than we're used to. Listed here are the Kavanaugh brothers, all from Connellsville, all from the same family. Starting here, we have Homer E. Kavanaugh, who entered the service in 43, stationed in Florida and California, got 6 weeks training out in Texas, then moved over to fight in France, Belgium, Germany, serving in the 9th Division of the First Army. Homer was killed at the Remagen bridgehead by German fire at only the age of 21. He was killed April 7, 45, at the end of the war, very end to the war. And then they got up here some Western Union telegraph he sent to his family, sent in $60. We got his ID card and a photo there of him in service. And here are his brothers. We got Ralph Kavanaugh. He ended up being wounded in Belgium on January 22nd, but he ultimately survived the war. Then we got Reed James Kavanaugh, entered the service in 42. Honorably discharged in 46, and then Gene Kavanaugh. And Gene Kavanaugh here, oh cool, he helped to release the Allied prisoners who were part of the Bataan Death March. Wow. And he got to see the surrender between Douglas MacArthur and Emperor Hirohito. Virginia Eberharder was from nearby Mill Run, Pennsylvania. Graduated Connellsville High School in 41 and 45, enlisted as a nurse. She ended up becoming, in the 1960s, one of the first nurses to achieve the rank of commander. And this is her uniform. They got various medals that she was awarded, and her cap up top. Here they have the uniform of Donald Cope. He fought in Italy during the Second World War. When he returned to Connellsville, he ended up becoming the commander of the Walter E. Brown VFW post and president of the Connellsville Veterans Commission. This is Georgie Varver Jr., Seaman First Class, served in the U.S. Navy from July 45 to 46, so he got involved very late in the war, but just in time to be stationed on the USS Texas. And they got some of his uniform and equipment on display here. The USS Texas right now is undergoing a massive restoration effort. This is Lloyd Kohenauer. You know somebody in the comments going to tell me I'm mispronouncing this, and please tell me actually. They actually got his naval uniform on display here. And he ended up serving on the USS Snapper, a submarine in the United States Navy, and this was really cool. They got some material from Snapper, the main propulsion control, the plaque that was on the propulsion control, they got it from the submarine when they were scrapping it. And up there in the corner you can see Lloyd's identification cards. So this is cool. I was not expecting to see a little display on the Tuskegee Airmen. And the reason for that is if you look at this photo, you'll see some of the first Tuskegee Airmen gathered around this plane. The gentleman in the cockpit is Captain Robert M. Long. He was actually from Connellsville native, so he's a Connellsville native that actually helped train the Tuskegee Airmen how to operate the planes. And over here are the military aircraft earphones for Joseph Philip Gomer. There's another photo here with, you kind of see the earphones on him in the pilot's seat. Very cool, very cool. So I was just informed what a deadly doll is. The Japanese military knew that the United States servicemen liked taking souvenirs, trophies of war. So what they ended up doing was they would haul out this doll and set an explosive charge in it, and should a GI pick it up, well, I think you know what would happen next.
So they went and he said that they ate so much food, like by the end of the game they were like just all
So this is John F. Wally Shore. He's from, of course, Connellsville, and he ended up being taken prisoner of war. This photo was taken with a group of POWs before they were released. And what I had a gentleman point out to me, if you noticed, just about everybody in that photo is missing a leg. Indeed, over here is Wally Shore's Purple Heart. This flag was captured from Iwo Jima, and what they discovered with the flag is even more cool, more remarkable. All these photographs, likely from one serviceman or a group of servicemen that were trying to defend the position where the flag is located.
Something I was very surprised to see is a prisoner of war uniform for German POW held in the United States. And something even more haunting, an intact uniform for a prisoner at the Dachau concentration camp.
One of the cooler things the canteen has on display are the people's radios. These were given out by the Nazi Party, by Adolf Hitler prior to and during the Second World War. They were very cheap to make, partly because you can only get 2 stations. Now, we started our conversation today where the canteen used to be located at the B&O Railroad Station in Connellsville, and you can see that the museum here definitely takes into appreciation how railroads are tied into the Second World War history. This model was originally built by scratch by Harry F. Clark, a serviceman who, when he came back from the war, began meticulously work on this massive layout. I think initially it was at his house, and then over time it ended up at the Nemenkollen Resort, and then the canteen were able to successfully relocate the entire layout, and that's where it is today. Now, it's not operating today. They only have select days throughout the year where they bring model railroads in to operate it, but this is just a sight to behold, even without any trains running. And this is a good overview of the model. Here's the round table and the Connellsville Yard, the town of Cass, then it winds up into Yoder, goes through this tunnel, then in the background, snakes through the mountains, and ends up here at Indian Creek for the Clark Lumber Company. Now, the model's not a exact reproduction of the railroads around Connellsville, but it's definitely influeed by railroads in southwestern Pennsylvania, and believe it or not, actually in West Virginia, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But what we're looking at right now is this scratch-built turntable and roundhouse with 48 radial tracks, 12 of which lead to the scratch-built roundhouse, 5,000 individual placed windows of pane glass. Wow. And if we move over here, it's kind of hard to see, but the yellow structure there, that's a model of the B&O Railroad Station in Connellsville. And of course, a model of the train yard in Connellsville, or at least what it may have looked like back in the day. Rail fans watching this will probably recognize these white buildings and definitely recognize this supply company store. These models are based off of the famed town of Cass, West Virginia, where the geared locomotives operate going up a very steep grade in southern West Virginia. One of my favorite parts of this model is the display of the looks to be abandoned coke works, or in the process of being abandoned. And why I'm really a fan of this shows you what happened when the coke industry gradually collapsed here in western Pennsylvania. Off to the right, you'll see what the ovens looked like in peak operation, but what they would have done was, over time, when they closed them up, they tore the faces off the ovens, and you ended up with these big gaping holes. And I was told the reason for this was insurance reasons, something that if the If they kept the brick in, they would still have to pay a certain insurance rate because they're still technically operational. But if you pull the faces off, then it's officially abandoned. Something to that caliber. We're gonna zoom in. Things are gonna get grainy, but I want you to see the Indian Creek train station. What I really like, the people have painted the backdrop to look like a very famous painting of the Baltimore, Ohio viaduct over Indian Creek. Very cool. This was the town of Indian Creek. It's no longer there. The tracks still run through it, however, the CSX does now. And there's a photograph of the Indian Creek station. This was an interchange between the Baltimore, Ohio and the Indian Creek Valley Railroad, which we talked about many, many moons ago in retracing the Indian Creek Valley Railroad. So you'll notice up on the ceiling there are different station names, obviously Connellsville, Indian Creek, and Dickerson Run. And they are, of course, all reference to real-life train stops. These are some photographs of the Dickerson Run train station. This was serviced by the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie Railroad. And then down here, you got a group of individuals in front of that station. Okay, you'll probably think I'm certifiable for filming in a bathroom, but my waitress told me I definitely should take a peek inside, and she was definitely right. The bathroom is lined with photographs of old Connellsville. This is probably the best part. An original Connellsville Courier newspaper for the day that Japan announced their surrender to the United States. That's awesome.
Before we leave, I think it's important to talk about one of the most famous individuals to come from Connellsville. John Woodruff, who was born in 1915, competed in the 1936 Olympics and won gold in the 800-meter race. This is the same Olympics held in Nazi Germany that Jesse Owens was very famous for competing in. Woodruff was one of 18 African Americans to participate in those Olympics. He would later go on and serve in the Second World War. Well, folks, I think the Connellsville Canteen does a wonderful job of preserving the history of their servicemen and women from the Second World War. If you are ever in the area, be sure to stop by. They are presently open Monday through Fridays. If you enjoyed this video and want to see me retrace more parts of our shared past, be sure to hit the like button down below, subscribe to Readout Productions, and if you want to go the extra mile in supporting me, you can buy me a cup of cappuccino through my Ko-fi page. Link is in the description below. Thank you for watching. Enjoy this video. We'll see you in the next one.